These acts include a lot of money from the federal government to help reduce the cost in this process. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed by the Biden administration in August of 2022, includes $400 billion in funding over 9 years. A significant amount of it is in clean energy tax credits, which can either flow directly to the city if they build their own solar farms, or to these other companies that we have power purchase agreements with.
Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon, both here in the room and our folks joining us online. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager here at the Columbia Public Library, part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. We'll be hearing from the Renewable Energy by 2030 Coalition. And today's Lunch and Learn is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. We have people, obviously, here in the room, also on Zoom, so just a little bit of housekeeping for our Zoom folks in particular. If you're on Zoom and want to ask questions during the Q&A portion of the event, which will be at the end, please use the chat feature. And when you're using chat, there is a drop down where you can choose who you want to be able to see your question. And we've had a request that if you could please select everyone so other people watching know what questions have already been asked, that would be great. For those in the room, I have a microphone. After their presentation, I can walk around and so you can ask your questions. So raise your hand. We also have note cards in the back. If you're more comfortable writing your question down, wave those around and we'll pick them up and read that out for you. We are recording today's presentation, so it will be available in the next few days on both the library's YouTube channel and the League's YouTube channel for future viewing, and so you can share with your friends. And now I'd like to welcome Barbara Hoppe with the League of Women Voters to say a few words and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Lauren. We're always appreciative of the library and Lauren Williams for being co-sponsors of our Lunch and Learn programs, and it's great to be in-house in the Friends Room and online. Today we have a very, I think, interesting, compelling, important program on Columbia Utility achieving 100% renewable energy by 2030. And I'm very pleased to have and introduce Carolyn Amperan, who is the chair of the Mid-Missouri Sierra Club, and Mark Hyam, who is the director of Mid-Missouri PeaceWorks. And they've both been very active in this issue and are very informative. And I think you'll find this is an extremely informative and important program. And I just wanted to mention again that we'll take questions at the end of the program. In-house, you can either say those on a microphone or write them down on a card. And then Lauren said on the chat if you're watching on Zoom. And I just want to briefly, before the program, mention that our next Lunch and Learn will be January 10th, which is the second Wednesday, and it will be on the unhoused/homeless in Columbia. And Carolyn Armbruster, who's with Como Mobile Aid Collective, will be one of our speakers, and then Carrie Utterback from the Department of Health, who sort of heads this whole area for the city, will be our other speaker. And then in February, it's a little different. We're going to have the program on the second Thursday. So that's February 15th, so not on Valentine's Day. And that will be a really interesting and important program. It's called QAnon from Fringe Conspiracy to Global Political Phenomenon. And our guest speaker will be MU sociologist Chris Connor. So with that, I give you Carolyn Amperan and Mark Hyam. I'm not sure what order.
Mark first.
I think I'm going first.
There you go.
So I'm here. Good morning in the afternoon. Oh, unmute. Yes, that's a good idea. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Well, I want to thank the library and the League for hosting this. And as Barbara said, this is a really important topic. So I'm glad to see you all here and hope there are others watching. And we will make it available as a recorded version for those who missed it. And this is our agenda for today. Basically, we want to explain what the 100% goal is, why we need to achieve it, and why we believe it's attainable, and basically go through what we're dealing with and process that's been dragging out for what seems like an inordinate amount of time. We brought this up, I guess it's more than 2 years ago, and
About 5 years.
yeah, these days go by us. What I do want to start off by saying though is that the news out of Abu Dhabi today is very disconcerting. There was a refusal, as most of you probably heard on the morning news, to embrace the idea of phasing out fossil fuels. And there's foot dragging that's gone on for an enormous amount of time on the global level by an industry that profits from pollution and is putting us in a situation where our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren will curse our generation. So we really need to take action at the grassroots. The fact that it's not being done properly on the global level puts more responsibility on us. And basically what we're asking of the city, Columbia Water and Light in particular, is that we go to 100% clean renewable energy for our electricity by 2030. And this is an essential goal, and I'm going to explain in a moment why it's an essential goal. I want to explain a little bit more what it is, because some people will say, well, what if the wind isn't blowing, or what if the sun isn't out at night? We expect that. We expect there'll be some places the wind isn't blowing at all times, and some places, every place where the sun's not out at night, unless you're in, the northern reaches. But basically, we're talking about making sure that we generate enough renewable electricity to cover all our needs. And that could be spread out differently. We could tap the grid as needed. We can develop storage over time. But this decade, if we can cut down in half our emissions, we can be on track, and we can do that best by going to 100% renewable. And that's what I want to focus on. This slide shows the reduction targets that have been currently embraced by Columbia. Now, it's important to distinguish between overall emissions and the emissions that come with electric generation. Electric generation accounts for about 43% of our overall greenhouse gas emissions. Our interim goal right now that has been embraced for the overall emissions is 35% by 2035. This is from the CAP, the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, 80% by 2050 and 100% by 2060. These goals are inadequate, in our opinion, but not just our opinion, in the opinion of the scientific community. We need to cut in half our emissions this decade. The municipal operation goals, that's, anytime a city vehicle is being driven, any city building is being heated and cooled, whatever the city does, not counting water and light, which is a city department, but looking at their internal usage. So if they're using electricity in their buildings, that would count on these municipal goals. And that interim goal is 50% by 35 and carbon neutral 100% by 2050. But again, this is inadequate. And the other part of this is it's not just inadequate, but we're not even getting there. Between 2015 and 2022, Columbia reduced our emissions, but we did it by 3%, 3.1 or something like that. At that rate, it would take 100 years to get to the 50% goal. If we, knock off 0.5% a year, 100 years to get that's just not up to snuff. So we are really pushing the city to do more. On renewables, way back when, in 2014, it seemed like it might be ambitious to say 25% by 2023, 30% by 2029. This is also old thinking. We realize now that our climate crisis, our climate emergency is much more severe than we otherwise expected. And we can't do that and think it's enough. But the thing is, we're not doing that. In 2022, we were at 18% renewable. Now, we're supposed to be at 25% renewable by 2023. We're missing the boat by about 25% of what we're supposed to be doing for renewables. And we don't have plans in place to get beyond that at this point. And so we're not meeting our goal, and our goal is far too weak. That's the bottom line. Now, the CAP, the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, calls for 100% renewable electricity by 2035. Well, that's an admirable goal. It's not enough, but it's a good goal. But the thing is, we're not meeting our goals right now. And the only way we're going to meet the goals is if we embrace the notion of getting much more aggressive at this, setting higher goals, coming up with interim goals. We need to take this seriously. Business as usual just won't cut it. We're in a climate emergency. And we need to have a buy-in from the community. So we need you all to be reaching out to neighbors and to colleagues and to making this something the city population as a whole understands, recognizes, and embraces. And our goal would be to be 100% by 2030. But, even if they didn't change the goal, if they were moving towards the goal of 2035, it would be something. But they, at this point, are just not getting it. Now, we've got a slide here that shows our carbon footprint. I won't spend much time on it, but just mention we're using about 4 times as much greenhouse gas per person as people around the world are, and we're about 25% above where the US as a whole is. It's not acceptable. Solving the climate crisis is urgent. And it says here, scientists say the world must keep global warming below 1.5 Celsius. We've all heard this. I would say it's not just scientists, but it's the cream of the crop of world scientists who are in this field. It's the UN has put together a body that is looking at, where we're at with the climate crisis. And they're telling us, you got to cut it 50% this decade. And that's not just any scientist saying it. It's the people who know the most about this. And when we put the other thing is, it says here that we are the 2nd largest producer of greenhouse gases. That's true. China's the 1st largest. Their population is more than 4 times our population. On a per capita basis, we are still producing and emitting far more greenhouse gases than they are. This shows part of why this is so important. Anybody who thinks that the climate crisis is something we've made up just doesn't know what they're talking about. 21 of the 22 hottest years on record have occurred since 2002, which means every year since 2002 has been record setting or at least above the average we've had in the past, or the peaks we've had in the past, I should say. The hottest of all have been the last 9 years, and this year is going down as the hottest in history. So we can talk about all of the different things that are going on that are the symptoms of climate change. You've heard it all, though. We've heard about sea levels rising. We've heard about the extreme weather events, their frequency increasing. We've heard over and over again about the fires, the floods, the climate-borne diseases, the spreading of the range of mosquitoes that bring us diseases. We've heard this over and over till we're numb at it. But the bottom line is, this stuff is real. It's happening now. And we've got to do something about it. This is a real urgency. And the thing that we see that can be best accomplished, to do this is to push for the 100% by 2030. I'm sort of going through my little pile of slides here. This shows that we've had historically 5 days per year with temperature above 95 Fahrenheit. We're projected to increase that to 50 days by mid-century. Our cold days are not as cold. Our hot days are hotter. This shows some of our extreme weather catastrophes. the thing that I just want to bring home to you all is that the key way that we can actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by the goal we've had set for us by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is to switch over our sourcing of electricity. Why do I say that? Because everything else we do is very small increments. You know, you want to get an electric vehicle rather than burning gasoline or diesel. A lot of people have to buy different vehicles. If you want to switch over our heating in our homes from our natural gas furnaces to instead heat pumps, run on electricity that's renewably generated, which is a great goal to do, but you've got to get literally tens of thousands of households switching over how they're getting their heating done. And you have to have those people have the money to do it, or you have to provide the money to do it. And you have to find the contractors. It's much easier, quicker, and it uses the existing infrastructure of distribution to just switch where the electricity is coming from. If it comes from a wind farm and a solar farm, or multiple farms, it's going to be able to go to clean, green, renewable. You won't even notice the difference at home. You turn on the light, it comes on. You go to your computer, it's working because it's plugged in and we're connected. There's a grid. This is what we've got to recognize, that the way to get significant cuts, I said earlier, 43% of our emissions are coming from our electric generation. So if we're going to meet the 50% goal, if we go to 100% renewable electricity, we only got 7% to cover by other means. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn now.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you for coming out, both on Zoom and in this busy month here in person. So I'm going to talk about, to get into the nitty gritty a little bit more about how Columbia can achieve 100% by 2030. We've actually, as we were just discussing, we've been working on this for several years. The Climate Action Plan for Columbia was actually passed in 2019, so it's going on 5 years old now, and the city will actually be working on an update on that next year. And when it was first passed, you know, we put a goal in that plan to get to 100% renewable energy, but we knew that the city was going to need, you know, concrete, factual information about the cost and the implications to get there. And so we're waiting for some of these studies that this slide highlights. So first off here, I do want to mention that every year the city does do a renewable energy plan. And in the last plan, the one for this year, they do call for trying to get to 49% renewables by 2028, and that would be exceeding the current goals in the ordinance. However, right now, as Mark said, there's no concrete plans to do that. There's no power purchase agreement signed. There's a few, you know, if the Grain Belt Express ever gets built, we've got that one, a pending contract. But the city, you know, in their defense, has been trying to get a new power purchase agreement this year, but they haven't liked, you know, the responses that they've received. So an interesting thing to know about these power purchase agreements is from the time you start the process to the time perhaps a new solar farm or a new wind farm gets built, it takes like 3 to 5 years. So if you're thinking, we're in 2023 right now, you know, to get something done by 2030, we have to start now. And we don't want to have to be buying all the energy in the last, you know, year or two. We want to, you know, phase this in. So this is something we can't delay on any longer. So in 2019, the cap was approved by the city council. And then the next step, we knew that this integrated electric resource and master plan was going to be done. And that's something that the city also does every 5 years to help us plan our electricity, to make sure that we forecast what the demand is going to be and how we're going to meet it, how much it's going to cost, that type of thing. And so these plans are done by regulation every 5 years. And not only do they forecast demand, but they also forecast a reserve so that if we get some really cold days or really hot days, that we're able to, you know, do above and beyond what we've ever supplied in the past. And so this plan projected scenarios through 2050, 8 different scenarios, and at least one of them was focused on 100% by 2030. And so this plan did show that the 2030 goal was feasible to get to 100% by 2030, and it was reasonably cost effective as well. Now, that plan was delayed somewhat by the pandemic, and so it took multiple years to develop and much longer than we anticipated. And so we got it in August of 2021, but by then everybody's like, oh, the date is out of date. So then the city council decides, okay, we've got to have another study to update the costs in that first study. So they hired the company called the Energy Authority to specifically focus on just this question and update those costs. And that produced 5 scenarios, all focused on how to get to 100% by 2030. And we got that report in July of this year. And that also showed that, getting to this goal 100% by 2030 is feasible and there is a reasonable cost. So here is a slide from that presentation, because one of the things that's really important to understand about us calling for this goal is that the price of renewable energies has continued to come down over time. And that's because of improvements in technology, economies of scale with, more production, more demand. And then another big factor that's on the horizon right now is that the government, the federal government funded the bipartisan infrastructure deal, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, which has significant savings in there for people that are producing renewable energy. So you can see on this chart that this has both the nominal and the price in 2023 dollars. And so it's a little easier to understand the 2023 dollars because they don't have inflation and everything built into them. So you can see that right now there's a little bit of competition for the solar and wind resources that are being built. But over time, you can see that, the prices are definitely continuing to come down for solar and wind. And in the long run, of course, the benefit of solar and wind is that there is no fuel cost. You don't have to pay for the sun or the wind. You just have to pay for the infrastructure to catch it. So there was 5 scenarios in this latest study. Our group, the coalition, is calling on the city to, focus on alternate case 1. You can see here the different prices of the energy and the net present value, which means they brought all the energy cost and the revenue flows and everything back into today's dollars so that it's easy to compare. The levelized cost of energy is also another way to compare costs over different things like wind and solar and battery and whatever else might be in the mix. And so we're focused on alternate case 1. It is not the least expensive one in these scenarios, but it is the one that makes the most practical sense to think about right now. And of course, there's no requirement that utility would actually implement it exactly the same way the model predicts. All of that would be based upon, future market prices and, who's building what where, and of course the tax credits and things like that. Alternate case 5 is also cost effective. And that one, which is over here, that one does, it is also cost effective. And that one involves, though, the plant. We have a contract with the power plant in Sikeston that is currently burning coal still. And that plant should be closing because it should be reaching its end of life in 2030. But, they are Sikeston itself is in the process right now of doing their own integrated resource plan to figure out what they want to do next. Do they want to, keep burning coal? Let's hope not. Do they want to convert to natural gas? We also hope not. Or do they want to move to solar and wind? So, what they do will impact our plan here. So we're hoping that they will close that Sikeston coal plant, but there's only so much we can do to lobby for that. So the big question that most people have is like, okay, all those big numbers are great, but what does it mean for what's, going to happen to my personal bill? Because even though we need to think about this as a global problem that we all have a part in solving, at the end of the day, a lot of people think about their bill. So one of the things that we need to understand about the utility is that the cost for energy, so the cost to actually produce electricity, is only a half of the utility's total cost. Because they have all those other expenses, the linemen that fix the power lines when they go down, or they install the new meters, or the running the plants. There's just all kinds of costs that they have. So energy itself is only a half of the utilities costs. And so that's the part that we're talking about. We're only talking about a half of the pie here. The other thing that really impacts the cost that we will see is when we need to do this. So that's another, or when they decide to invest in this wind capacity, solar capacity, or battery capacity. And so the longer the ramp is, that if we can get started on it now, then they can spread it out and not, have to put a bunch of expenses into one particular year. So the timing of the investments can have a big impact on rates. The other thing is that I want to mention is that even if the city makes this commitment, and you're never going to reach a goal if you don't set it, you have to set a goal so you can start working towards it. And even if the city makes this goal, we have the opportunity at every step along the way to say, okay, wait, let's think about this because, something's gone awry in the market. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, gas prices, went crazy. So we can always say, okay, because the city council has to approve every power purchase agreement and they have to approve every rate increase. So there's an opportunity all along the way to apply the brakes, to make a pause, to do the rational thing for the community. So I don't want anyone to think just because we pass this, let's say in February, that means that it's a done deal and it cannot be modified. The council can make a decision all along the way on how this moves forward. And just like Mark said, we're not making the goal that we set for this year because one of our contracts fell through that the utility had. So, that's really bad. We're unhappy about that, but, the sky isn't falling. So let's hope that we can, get a new contract in place and that we can get up to that 25% like we want to be really quickly. But I just want to use that as an example of that this is a flexible goal. We need to set the goal or we won't make it, but it's flexible about how we're going to get there. So some of the details on the case that we're recommending are here. The Energy Authority has estimated that this is going to require $25 million more revenues over 16 years. And their model put the timing of that because of some of the long lead times, et cetera, which would be from 2028 to 2043. So when you think about it, the utility has revenues every year of over $170 million. So $25 million is really not that big of an additional investment for us to make to do our part to save our climate and to save ourselves from all these extreme weather events and things that Mark talked about. So the city staff took the numbers from the Energy Authority and then tried to estimate and break that down into percentages and, how much per year and that type of thing. And so the two, as I said, the timing of these investments is important. And because we've kind of drug our feet on this, we will have big investments in 2028 and 2029. And so those are the two most important years in terms of the rate impacts. And so the maximum that they're forecasting right now would be 5.5% or $6.5 million in 2028 and 5% or around $6 million in 2029. But then after that, the percentages fall to like only 2.5% a year or even zero in some years. So this really is not a large amount of money. We're trying to, when you put it in the big picture perspective, we're also working with the numbers to try and break it down to, exactly how much per kilowatt hour. So you could take that and apply it to your own bill. The other thing that's important to know about all these numbers that I'm sharing is that none of them include any federal funding opportunities. So as I mentioned, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill include a lot of opportunity. Oops, my thing working right. These acts include a lot of money from the federal government to help reduce the cost in this process. The Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed by the Biden administration in August of 2022, includes $400 billion in funding over 9 years. A significant amount of it is in clean energy tax credits, which can either flow directly to the city if they build their own solar farms or to these other companies that we have power purchase agreements with. So none of that was factored into these costs. The coalition and Sierra Club did arrange a presentation for city staff of all these, many of these opportunities that can be taken advantage of on a local level. And it is our understanding that both the utility and the sustainable office sustainability office are applying for some grants, but we don't know which ones. The other really important thing to know about this federal money is that because we used to have a power plant here that burned coal and now does not, we are considered an energy community. So we are eligible for money that's set aside in a special bucket for communities that are designated energy communities. And we're also eligible for money that's set aside in a special bucket for communities that have a census tract that includes lower income, disadvantaged, historically disadvantaged populations. And we have one of those census tracts as well. So hopefully we will be taking advantage of this money, and it's going to reduce that $25 million. Another thing that we also need to work on at the same time we're working on converting our energy away from fossil fuel is to reduce our energy demands. And Mark talked about that, how we can, those of us that own our own homes can invest in HVAC systems that are more efficient. We can use heat pumps. We can get off of natural gas. There's a lot of programs that are going to help people reduce their energy demand. And also, this is important, of course, for low and moderate income households, reduce their energy costs. So Mark mentioned this a little bit. Of course, another big implication or consideration is the reliability. And, if we go to this, will we always have electricity when we want it? And the interesting thing about Columbia's electricity that really isn't commonly known is that it all comes from the grid anyway. We don't really produce hardly any of it locally. I mean, a really small percentage gets produced locally. The rest of it comes in on the grid, which is the transmission lines. And so our grid that we're part of is part of what they call here in the whole Midwest. There's a grid operator called MISO that runs that grid, and they manage in 5-minute increments where the power comes from and, who's supplying it. Do we need to ask for more? Do we need less? That type of thing. So the reliability that we experience here in Columbia is a function of the entire Midwest grid. Now, the grid can be designed and is designed to include a lot of diverse resources to meet this. So we don't have like all of our solar farms in Missouri, and we don't have all of our wind farms in Iowa. We've got wind farms in Iowa, we've got wind farms in Kansas, we've got wind farms in Missouri, we've got solar spread everywhere. So when you have that, it means that you have more reliability because of course the weather conditions are not the same in all those locations at the same time. Another thing that has really improved in recent years is weather forecasting. Those of you who, use a weather app either online or on your phone know that you can get hour by hour forecast, and they're right. It didn't used to be that way. You could know that the rain's coming in 15 minutes and where it's going to hit in Columbia. So that kind of weather predictability also means that they have that kind of predictability with the grid to know, that we're going to get so much wind energy from this wind farm in Iowa, and we're going to get so much sun from this sun farm in Boone County. And so that really helps them be able to predict what goes on with the grid. And then there also is, because of all of this, the grid is easily able to be able to say, okay, Iowa, we need you to turn on more of your wind turbines because we need more wind energy from you because it's going to get cloudy in Boone County here in 20 minutes. So that's the kind of thing that they can do with the grid now. Some other features that will also help improve 24/7 resiliency is that wind energy actually is produced a lot at night. So we know we don't get solar at night, although I know there's some people working on that technology too to store what rays you do get. But today you can capture wind energy at night because frequently the wind is blowing at night. The other benefit, and we would like to see the city do more of this as we move forward, is have more on-site renewables, because this not only gives us reliability in terms of, we have it here locally, but the biggest source of failure in the electrical system is the power lines, the grid, the transmission lines. And so by having more local resources, we cut out some of that risk of a transmission line going down, let's say somewhere up in some other part of the state. As I mentioned, storage options are increasing and the costs are decreasing. And I believe that in the renewable energy plan, the city did indicate they are going to try and do a pilot of using some storage options. So that's a good step in the right direction. And some of these scenarios, the model from the consultant did call for using storage. And, that's certainly something that helps improve the reliability if we have some storage located here in Boone County. Now, another important thing that the coalition has decided to support is to keep open the Columbia Energy Center and the single cycle gas generator at the municipal power plant until sometime after 2030. Even though we're calling for 100% of what Columbia uses to be available to the grid through clean energy, we're saying, because initially people thought, well, they're saying that we should shut down those resources. And we're not saying that. We're saying they should be for backup only. And so they would be there and they would be available to the grid to call on, or to the city if they needed it, but usually the grid would call first to power them up. They can, since they're gas, they can be powered up very quickly. And that gives us not only a local resource to provide backup, but it also provides backup to the bigger grid. So we would keep those resources open, but they would not run unless there was high demand that required the grid to call and say, let's turn them on. And hopefully then we could shut them down sometime after, 2035 or, 2040. A lot of that has to be negotiated with the grid operators too, when you can take something like that offline. So we're not the only cities that are doing this. This map is actually 1.5 years old now. Sierra Club was keeping track of cities that were making commitments, but they stopped doing that about a year ago. So, but a lot of cities have made commitments to go to 100% renewable energy. We are not the only ones that are thinking about this. Oops. And, usually it does like two things, but the ones that are already there, you can see Rockport, Missouri was one of the first communities in the country to go 100%. They have a lot of wind energy and they use the grid, just like I'm talking about, to get their energy when their wind farms aren't producing it. So it is definitely possible, and other communities have done it. So we must address both energy demand and energy production simultaneously. And so this is something that we want to make clear when we talk to the city council and to the public. So we're calling for this goal of 100% clean renewable energy by 2030, and that goal is supported by the city's Climate and Environment Commission to change the date to 2030. We also have in the works, as part of the Climate Action Plan work, and this is in progress with the city, a movement to adopt minimum energy efficiency standards for rental housing. And this is really important when we consider our lower moderate income population and helping them be able to afford this transition. Because over 50% of the homes and units in Columbia are rental units. And a lot of them are really out of date in terms of energy conservation. And so this is something that the city council approved. Gosh, it's been about a year ago now that they said, okay, let's move forward with this. But we're at the point now where they've hired a consultant who's going to be writing the proposed standards. And I'm not talking Cadillac standards here. These are going to be basic energy efficiency for homes and apartments that, that they don't have holes in the walls or, holes around the window frames, and they have decent insulation in the attic and things like that. So, so this will go a long way though to helping us not only cut our demand, but also help people lower their costs to pay for their bills. Now, Columbia is one that was on moving to the next bullet, which is building codes. Columbia was was actually the first community in the state to adopt the 2018 energy conservation codes for both commercial and residential. So for 2018, any building that's been built in this community has been built to a much higher standard of energy efficiency, which is wonderful, but we need to stay current with those codes. Because of the pandemic, it looks like we'll be skipping the 2021 codes. So we will definitely be pushing hard to get the 2024 codes in place, because we need to continue to push forward as new technology comes out and new methods come out on making newer buildings more energy efficient. The city is in process of benchmarking all of their city buildings for energy usage. And now they've actually, I believe, completed the benchmarking. So now they're in the process of identifying the priority upgrades to improve energy efficiency. And they've actually applied for some grants to help fund that. So, these are all things that will help us reduce our demand. And then, in case you're not aware, if you are a Columbia Water and Light customer, either commercial or residential, there's a significant number of programs already available to help you reduce your energy demand and get rebates for improving your lighting, improving your attic insulation, improving your overall energy conservation of your home. So I would definitely encourage you to check those out. Some of them, you can get a free assessment as one of them. And a lot of these are specific for people that are low or moderate income. Now, we feel we do need more programs focused on lower moderate income families or households, but at least we have some. So I'd encourage you to check that out at Columbia Power Partners online. So how can you help with this process? So if you're interested and if you support us, we definitely need your help because the city council has to feel that there's support in the community to be able to make this transition and set this goal. And so if you would contact your city council member and the mayor to tell them your support for the goal of 100% renewable energy by 2030, and also encourage the staff to apply for these federal funding opportunities. There's work in getting money from the federal government, so sometimes staff people are reluctant to pursue that. Or maybe we even need to hire another person that's a grant writer, so we need the city council to be doing what it takes to help us get this federal money so we can make this transition and do it at the least cost for our community. Another thing that, if you're interested, the coalition has a written proposal that goes over what Mark and I have covered, and then some other things in even more detail. If you're interested in that, you can access it at this short URL, bit.ly at 100 by 2030 CWL proposal, and you can share that around. And we talked about the fact that this session today is being recorded. It'll be on the league website. It'll be on the library's website. If you can share it with friends and family or on your social media, that's another way to help spread the word and get people educated on this subject. If there's any organizations that haven't signed a sign-on letter yet, that organization can be a church, it can be a business, it can be nonprofit, it can be anything. We have several organizations that have signed on, but that's really helpful to us to go to the city council and say, look, this isn't just these few people on the coalition or these few organizations. It's all these businesses and organizations in Columbia. So we would appreciate more endorsement letters. And then, of course, the other way you can help is by reducing your own demand for electricity. And, that's by making the energy efficiency improvements we talked about. And then in the summertime, not right now, but in the summertime, our peak demand always comes between like 4 and 7 p.m. And you can do things that really help reduce that peak demand. You can, maybe set your thermostat a couple of degrees higher for those hours. You cannot run optional appliances during those hours, like your clothes washer, your dishwasher, your vacuum, any of those kind of things. So I've just gotten in the habit of always running my dishwasher outside of those hours. So, and then for those of you that are able, you can install solar at your home or business, or the city just announced their new community solar program. So if you can't install solar at your own house or business or apartment, you can invest in the community solar program. And that's another way for us to show confidence with the city that this is something that we want to do. And the more people that invest in the community solar program, then they'll be able to, invest in another solar farm. So I just want to wrap up with saying that in this whole climate issue, not just here in Columbia, but with the state, with the federal government, with the county, it's so important that you use your voice. Next year, we'll have the opportunity to use our vote to get the right people into office. And also, you have your own personal choices. You might be buying a lot of appliances for holiday gifts right now. So, think about, always getting energy smart appliances and checking how much energy they use. And it's so important that we speak truth to power, that we don't just, sit back and, say that this is like, something that's going to happen later on. They don't have to have an urgency. As Mark talked about, we must have an urgency, and we must keep making that point with them, because right now the city of Columbia does lack a sense of urgency. So with that, I think it's time to open it up for questions.
So if anyone has questions in-house, you want to use the mic? I think we have one. We'll go to the in-house first.
Thank you. I have a question about the term grid. And it's just, I don't quite understand. I now have solar panels on my house. And my understanding is that the energy generated from them goes to the grid. And then what I use comes back from the grid. But then I'm getting the impression that there's also the grid from which Columbia Water and Light pulls energy. And do you see my confusion?
Yes. Here, take it on.
Yeah, basically, when you're producing electricity at your house through your solar panels, if you're needing electricity at your house at that time, it will take that electricity first. If you produce more on a sunny day than you're using at that time, that goes into the grid, and that energy moves around. Basically, you've got electrons running through wires, and those electrons don't specify where they come from. There's a big nuclear power plant out in Coway County that is probably the closest to us. We're not buying any electricity produced there, but the grid is energized by the operation of that nuclear plant. And the plants that we're getting 75% of our electricity from, approximately, coal plants, are in southeastern Missouri, in Illinois, and north of Kansas City. So there are 3 locations that are producing the bulk of our power, but that's going into a grid that's moving electrons as needed, where they're needed. So I'm not sure if I'm answering this.
I'll just add one thing to what you said. So just to add to what Mark said, the grid is everything from the meter at your house through the lines that go up to the poles, all of those poles between here and the power plant, and then off into the far distance, like Mark says, to power plants in Illinois and in Iowa and all those places. So the grid is everything from the meter to your house to the power plant and back again. So it's all of the lines, whether they're above ground or underground. And all the power plants, that all comes.
So if energy comes to the grid from fossil fuels or nuclear, how can the city, which is only a small part of the grid, influence where the energy?
Every kilowatt hour we produce using renewables is a kilowatt hour that doesn't have to be produced in a fossil fuel plant.
Right, so the way that I just put up a slide about this, the way the grid operators run the grid network, they decide like every 5 minutes where the energy is coming from. And so if our city buys enough renewable energy and puts it into the grid, no matter what state it gets entered in, that's renewable energy that's available on the grid to use. Because that energy costs less than fossil fuel energy, whether it's natural gas or coal produced, the grid operators are always going to buy it first. So the grid operators are always going for the least cost choice every 5 minutes. And so the renewable energy costs less. So if we're putting 100% of our demand into the grid, we're adding that much more renewable energy to the grid. It's going to be bought first. And that means these fossil fuel resources, they'll still be online and they'll still be sitting there, but they will be running less often. So it is a complex topic, but because fossil fuel energy costs more to the grid than renewable energy does, those fossil fuel sources are going to be on standby more often. And that's how we affect the grid.
I have 3 quick questions. One, I'm on Boone Electric, and you're talking about City of Columbia. I'm hoping Boone Electric is in this also because not only myself, but I know multiple people are on Boone Electric. The second thing is wind turbines and how does that affect wildlife, as in bird populations? And then how much of the acreage are the solar panels using as far as acreage of land?
You know, they get them.
Sure.
Okay, so Boone Electric, you know, is not part, it is part of the overall city goals, but of course, the city has no control over what Boone Electric does. So we need the customers of Boone Electric, and we, when I talk about we, it's the coalition. We need the customers of Boone Electric to be expressing to them that they want, you know, Boone Electric to be reducing their use of fossil fuels and go with more renewable energy. The Boone Electric uses the grid differently than the city of Columbia does, in that they buy a lot of their power from an association of co-ops. And so I'm not gonna go, I don't have all the details on that, but I will say that it's different. And so, but it's really important for Boone Electric customers to be voting for board members who will, you know, do solar and renewable and, you know, be expressing that. And I'm sure I'm gonna forget your second and third question. So the second one was about wind.
Yeah.
So Sierra Club and the Nature Conservancy take a really big interest in, you know, where wind farms are sited. And so all over the country, when new wind farms are being produced, we're there, you know, trying to make sure that they are not in the pathways, the migration pathways. And so, and there's a lot of things that can be done, both for birds and bats, which are both wildlife of concern, to make sure that they're not hurt by these wind farms. So one is positioning and siting. The second one is at what speed the wind turbines turn on. And so that's something like here in Boone County, when Boone County was considering their wind ordinance, you know, we provided input to say, you know, about the siting issues and about the wind speed turn on issues. So those are things that can definitely be done to reduce the impact on wildlife, and frankly, cats kill way more, you know, birds than wind turbines.
Now, the current generation wind generators they're taller, they have longer blades that move slower. And that's helped. They also originally were building them kind of like erector sets with like cross beams holding places where birds could stop and nest. That they've changed it, so now they're tubular and there's no place to land on them. So there has been a real effort made to reduce. And when Carolyn says the cats kill more, cats kill like, I don't remember, it's like 80 times
It's
as
a lot.
many. It's just huge.
It's huge.
And the acreage, my other question was about the acreage of land, which I just was curious about that.
Yeah, I don't have any current statistics on that, but you know, it is one of those kind of things that the solar farms can be built in a lot of places where you can also then continue to simultaneously use the land for agricultural purposes. So, you know, that they can either farm under the panels with crops that kind of like a little bit of a shade, or, you know, around the panels. So it isn't something that from a Sierra Club perspective that, you know, we feel like there's any concern on. You know, over time, of course, and then of course we have all these rooftops that are still underutilized. A lot of these big box stores are starting to put more solar on their rooftops because, you know, they have huge space on the rooftops. So you know, it isn't something that, from a Sierra Club perspective, I know they don't have any concerns about.
I would also just add that the total area to generate enough electricity for the whole country as a percentage is low single digits. I can't remember the exact number, but like 2 or 3 sticks in my brain. I don't know if you have.
And that's what I recall.
It's tiny compared to physical space that our country takes, and that would be if all our electricity came from solar. Wind takes up much less space, and
also
you can just
present
farm around
farming
it.
opportunities. And, you know, we have so much land that's unusable either because there's not enough water there for farming or something. So, you know, solar doesn't really require any water on site. So a lot of that kind of land that you can't use for anything else is potentially good for solar.
Thank you. We have 2 questions from the chat. The first one is, please again explain costs to each individual as we reach these goals.
Well, I guess what I would say on that is we don't yet have all of the numbers on what the cost to each individual is going to be. You know, some of our team members are doing estimates, and the coalition hasn't had an opportunity to, you know, get through the numbers yet, and so we won't publicize them as the coalition until we've validated everything. But, you know, we're talking about like 5% in 1 year and 5.5% was the worst case that the consultant and the utility came up with. So that's, you know, and that's only again on the energy part of your bill, not your whole bill. So and I think we'll just have to say, stay tuned on costs for individual customers.
Right, but there was some estimate from the experts on the different years. I would add that people can reduce that cost by doing energy conservation and reducing their energy demand.
Right. Which
Then
you can actually
balance out that 5%.
significantly reduce your own bill if you have old appliances or your house hasn't had updated insulation. You know, there's significant things you can do to reduce your.
Or I have neighbors that just keep their outdoor lights on all the time.
Yeah, and practice it,
And
simple
all the
practices
house
like
lights
that.
on.
Yeah,
If they have a dollar issue, they can address it, right?
yeah.
The other question is what and where is the Columbia Energy Center?
It's up north of town, going toward Moberly. I don't know the exact location, but it's a natural gas plant, or a plant that uses natural gas to generate electricity. It was owned by Ameren, and they sold it to Columbia 15 years ago, something
I
like that.
think when I was on the city council, and I've been there, it takes up very little space. It's a small area with big sort of white, it was a white round tower. So it's a small area that produces sort of
And I
backup.
think it has
Energy.
4 separate generators in it.
Maybe that was it. Yeah, here we go. Oh, yeah, and we have another, let's do another in-house and then we'll go to chat again.
I didn't see any mention of the methane gas that's used, I guess, creates power that goes into the grid at our landfill. And I understand that that is beneficial for the landfill itself because it speeds up the degeneration process and allows, them to use the landfill longer. So my question just is, how does that, are you suggesting that be shut down or would that continue?
We are suggesting that continue. It's only producing like 1 to 1.5% of Columbia's electricity. And we did support recently, the city added another generator at the landfill. And we did support that because it does, as you said, it captures methane and keeps the raw methane out of the atmosphere. And then once you burn methane, then you still have some emissions that are carbon dioxide, but it's much greatly reduced. So yes, so we supported that. That would continue because that's considered a renewable kind of thing.
We're also getting Jeff City's landfill gas too, I believe.
Yes, we do.
I have
What's
a
the
couple of
payback
chat,
time
I
on
have a
solar
couple of
panels?
chat questions.
What's the payback time on solar panels?
He's asking about payback time on solar panels.
Payback time for a household, I bought mine 10 years ago, and so I haven't been monitoring that closely. I would definitely, if you're interested, encourage you to talk with, there's a lot of quality solar providers in town. And this coming year, there's going to be tax credits available. So it's really good time to, talk with a solar provider and see what, your cost and your personal payback would be. Because also it depends on how much electricity you use. What
It
your
also
payback is.
depends on the orientation of your house. And the city's actually giving more rebates right now if you're facing west than if you're facing east, because that becomes useful at the peak period of the day. I've heard 3 years, but again, that's a very rough hewn estimate.
There's a message in here that relates to your question. Anyone who wants to be a green energy user should join the community solar program. It's much cheaper to you than installing solar panels on your own home. Utility is able to get an economy of scale in setting up the solar farm compared to you putting it on your own home. We have them on ours, and I can tell you that, in the winter, we can't adjust them, so we get nice use in the summer, but practically zero in the winter.
Right, but the
Which
way,
they can do on the solar, they can do a better job of that on the solar farm than we can.
Well, true, but also, just in terms of that, the way the city's net metering works, like I said, I have solar on my home and I build up a credit in the summertime when we have lots of solar because, as Ruth said, we generate more than we use. And so the city gives me a credit. And then that's what I use in the wintertime. I take down my credit that pays my electrical bills.
Another post says, people who post on Facebook's Nextdoor, she says, would greatly benefit from one or both of you posting about this proposal. There are those proposals on there. People's comments indicate they don't know anything about these efforts.
Okay, I do try and get on Nextdoor and correct misinformation from time to time, but it could be a full-time job.
One more question. I heard Missouri has not signed up for IRA programs. Is this true?
Missouri has signed up for some of them. The IRA being the Inflation Reduction Act. A big one that Missouri is participating in is Solar for All. And recently you may have heard the city of Columbia hosting some public meetings to collect input to give to the state for the state climate action plan. And so that's part of a pollution reduction grant that the state is participating in. So the state is participating in some of these, but there's a big one that we want the state to participate in, they haven't signed up for, and we have to keep the pressure on them for that.
So with that, I want to give a big thank you to Carolyn Amperin and Mark Hyam for their work and this presentation. And remind people that our next Lunch and Learn is January 10th. Pretty sure, yes, Wednesday, second Wednesday. And it will be on the unhoused / homeless in Columbia with two excellent speakers and Como Mobile Aid Collective with Catherine Armbruce and then Carrie Utterback with the Health Department. So please stay tuned for that. And then I encourage everyone to go out and mobilize your neighbors and your friends, because this is an effort that unless the council really has big community input, it won't happen. So we need to have that happen. I'm going to go door to door with a petition in my neighborhood. Hopefully other people will do that too. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you.